Welcome back, guys, to Blackout War Stories. 74% of you still haven't subscribed. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. It was April 2008 when my unit entered the Kunar Valley. The orders came down without much explanation, the way they often did. We were told to push deep into the mountains, secure a cluster of villages, and keep supply routes open. On paper, it sounded straightforward. But nothing about that valley was ever simple. The first thing I remember wasn't the terrain or the locals. It was the silence. Normally, you expect noise in a place like that. Distant gunfire, the echo of movement through the hills, maybe even the sound of life from the villages. But when we dismounted and started moving on foot, there was nothing. Just wind moving across jagged slopes and the crunch of our boots in the dirt. We all felt it. That shared, unspoken tension when something doesn't line up. Corporal Hines muttered behind me, "Feels like walking into a damn photograph." Nobody laughed. We just kept climbing, weapons ready, eyes cutting across the ridgelines where trouble usually lived. By 1400 hours, we'd reached the first village marked on our maps. It looked abandoned, though not in the usual way. No signs of a firefight, no collapsed walls, no smoke. Just doors swung open, food left out on tables, and blankets still pinned where families would have slept. It was as if the people had vanished mid-step. Lieutenant Farrow ordered us to sweep house by house. I was on the left side of the squad, clearing through narrow mud brick rooms. I remember the smell of stale bread, the sight of a half-filled teacup, and a child's shoe dropped in the doorway. Small things that didn't make sense in the bigger picture. If these villagers had been warned or threatened, they would have packed what they could and left in a hurry. But they hadn't. When we regrouped outside, everyone was shaken in different ways. Some were spooked. Others shrugged it off, saying maybe the villagers had gone to relatives or moved downriver. But I knew what I was seeing. No one leaves a full pot of water boiling on a stove unless they expect to be right back. We pushed further, 2 more kilometers into the valley. The second village was the same. Abandoned, untouched, Eerie. At that point, even the lieutenant stopped trying to rationalize it. He just told us to stay sharp and keep moving. By dusk, we had set up a temporary perimeter near a stone bridge that crossed a narrow stream. The mountains pressed in tight around us, casting long shadows that made the place feel like a trap. As night fell, the air turned sharp and cold. We sat in a tight circle, rifles across our knees, waiting for something to happen. It did. Around 200, I woke to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was just one of the guys taking a leak. But when I looked over, all of them were still in their bags, motionless. The steps were soft, but steady, moving just beyond the edge of our position. I raised my rifle, straining my eyes into the dark. "Who's out there?" I whispered. No answer. Then the footsteps stopped. Complete silence again, heavy and unnatural. I scanned the tree line until my eyes burned, but there was nothing. Just the stream trickling under the bridge. When morning came, I didn't mention it. Maybe I didn't want to sound jumpy, or maybe I wanted to believe it was nothing. But I caught Hines staring at me as if he knew I'd heard something. He didn't say a word either. Later that day, we moved further up the valley. That's when we found the first sign that someone or something had been expecting us. And that was the moment I realized we weren't just walking into enemy territory. We were walking into someone else's story, one we weren't supposed to know. The next morning, the valley rose steeper under the burning sun, each step turning heavier than the last. By then, none of us were talking much. The quiet villages behind us had done something to the squad. It wasn't fear exactly, but a kind of unease that sank into your chest and stayed there. That morning, Lieutenant Farrow gathered us around the bridge before we moved out. He squatted down on a flat rock, map spread on his knee. His finger traced lines across the paper like he was explaining something simple, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. "Command wants us moving north," he said, deeper in. Another 3 clicks. "Supposed to be signs of enemy stockpiles out here. We find them, we mark them, and we move. Copy?" Nobody answered at first. Then Staff Sergeant Brenner said, "Sir, with all due respect, if there's Taliban pushing supplies through here, why are these villages untouched? Why'd they clear out clean?" Farrow didn't like being questioned. but even he couldn't ignore it. Not our job to ask why. Our job is to move. He folded the map, stood up, and that was it. We all knew something was off, though. Brenner had been in country longer than most of us, and he usually had a nose for when things didn't add up. He muttered to me as we slung our packs, "This isn't a sweep. We're being steered." I didn't answer, but I knew he was right. Before I go deeper, I should explain where we came from, because it matters. We weren't fresh boots when we walked into Kunar. We'd already been through Nuristan and had seen our share of firefights. By 2008, most of us had lost friends, some more than once. We carried those names in our pockets and on our arms, scribbled in marker or etched into the metal of a lighter. That's how we coped. Jokes when we could, silence when we couldn't. The valley was different, though. The villages we saw in Nuristan had been alive, even when the people were cautious around us. You could hear kids, smell food cooking, feel that normal life was still pushing against the war. But in Kunar, it felt like life itself had been drained out before we even arrived. None of us talked about it in those words, of course. We weren't poets, but you could see it in the way everyone scanned too long, the way nobody trusted the silence. By mid-afternoon, we reached higher ground, where the path narrowed to a trail cut into the side of a cliff. Below us, the river churned white against rocks. Above us, the mountain leaned heavy, with loose stone that could tumble at any second. That's when we found it. At first, it looked like just another boulder, but Brenner spotted it. A mark carved into the stone. It wasn't Arabic, and it wasn't English either. Just a series of sharp lines that cut across one another, almost like runes or coded slashes. Fresh, too. You could still see the dust where the rock had been chipped. "Locals don't carve this kind of crap," Brenner said, brushing his glove across it. "This is deliberate." We took photos, sent them back through the secure tablet we carried, but nothing came back. No guidance, no explanation. Just silence on the other end. That silence became its own kind of answer. We made camp again that night under a jagged overhang, fireless to avoid drawing attention. The stars in that valley were sharp, like needles scattered across black glass. Hines broke the quiet first. "Tell me none of you think this feels staged." "Staged how?" asked Carter, the youngest of us. He was 19, face still soft under the helmet. "Like we're not chasing them," Hines said. "Like they're leading us." Nobody argued, because that's what it felt like. Each village was a breadcrumb, each mark on the rocks another trail. We weren't hunting, we were being pulled along. Brenner leaned back against his pack, staring at the stars. "Command's got us out here for something they're not telling us. Could be weapons, could be intel, hell, could be some old Soviet bunkers. But they know more than we do. Bet my life on it, Pharaoh heard all this, of course." He sat apart from us, radio pressed to his ear, whispering into the static. When he came back over, he didn't say what he'd heard. He just told us to rest up. That didn't sit right either. I'll tell you something I've never told anyone before. Before we left Jalalabad, a buddy of mine in Intel slipped me a warning. Not in words, but in the way he avoided saying them. He handed me an extra set of batteries for my gear, eyes steady but voice flat. "You'll want these," he said. "Where you're going." I asked him where exactly that was, but he just shook his head. At the time, I brushed it off. Now out in Kunar, with the abandoned villages and carved symbols, I couldn't shake the memory. Somebody knew this wasn't a routine patrol. Somebody knew we were walking into something unusual. 2 days in, we reached another village. Same story. Empty, still, lifeless. But this one was different in one way. Inside one of the houses, stacked neatly against the wall, were crates. Wooden, sealed, marked only with faded stencils. No language, no unit markings, nothing that identified who they belonged to. They were heavy too. Too heavy for farming supplies. We radioed it in. Again, silence. Pharaoh finally snapped. He slammed the handset down and cursed under his breath. "We're not alone here," he said. "Someone's monitoring us, but they're not answering." He wasn't wrong. That night we heard movement again. Not just footsteps this time, but the sound of something being dragged across gravel. None of us slept. We just sat with rifles in our laps, waiting for a fight that never came. By then, the squad wasn't the same. The jokes dried up. Even the small talk disappeared. Everyone was locked in their own head, chewing on the same questions but too tired or too stubborn to ask them out loud. It wasn't the enemy we were worried about anymore. It was the not knowing. Soldiers can handle danger. What eats you alive is the mystery, the sense that someone above you is pulling strings and you're just the piece being moved. And yet we kept moving. Orders were orders. The maps told us to push further north, and so we did. On the fourth day, just past dawn, we found something we couldn't ignore. We were moving through a narrow pass when Carter stumbled on a shallow pit covered by loose brush. Inside were burned documents, half ashes, scraps of paper charred black, but not completely destroyed. Brenner pulled one out carefully, brushing the soot. It wasn't in English, but it wasn't Arabic either. The letters looked like a mixed part Russian, part something else. And in the corner of one page was a stamp, half burned, but I could make out a date. 1986. Cold War, Brenner whispered. What the hell are we walking into? Nobody answered him, because nobody knew. That night, as we camped near the ridge, I couldn't sleep again. Not because of footsteps this time, but because I realized something. We weren't looking for Taliban weapons. We weren't chasing insurgents. We were digging into something older, buried deep in this valley long before we arrived. And the silence from command told me they wanted it that way. When I finally closed my eyes, I knew the next day would bring something worse, not an attack, but the truth starting to surface. And once truth begins to surface in a place like that, it never does so gently. The next morning, we broke camp early. Nobody had slept much. We were drinking instant coffee from tin cups, eyes bloodshot, rifles always within reach. The burned papers were still sitting in Brenner's pack. None of us talked about them, but they weighed heavier than the ammo we carried. The trail grew steeper as we pushed further north. The air thinned, sharp in our lungs. The valley pressed in tighter, the river now just a glimmer far below. Every bend in the path felt like it could be an ambush point, but still, nothing. No gunfire, no movement. Just that silence again, like the land itself was holding its breath. Hines finally broke it. This isn't right. If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead. They're letting us through, nobody argued. By midday, we reached a cliff face where the trail ended. At first, it looked like the valley had shut us out completely, but tucked into the rock, hidden behind brush, was a cave. Pharaoh made us form up, weapons raised, while Brenner and I moved in first. Our lights cut through the dark, beams sliding over rough stone and scattered debris. The deeper we went, the more it became clear this wasn't just a hole in the mountain. Someone had used this place. Old metal drums were stacked against the walls, rust eating through their sides. There were broken crates, torn tarps, and in one corner, a rotted wooden chair. But what froze us all was a series of papers nailed directly into the rock. Maps, hand-drawn, faded, edges curling. They showed the Kunar Valley, marked with circles and lines, arrows pointing to places we hadn't reached yet, and in the margins were notes written in a mix of Russian and something I didn't recognize. Spetsnaz, Brenner muttered, or worse. I leaned closer. Some of the marks weren't just locations. They were symbols. The same sharp slashes we'd seen carved into stone earlier. Pharaoh ordered us to photograph everything. We sent the files up the chain, waited, and just like before, silence. That silence was worse than any gunfire. We camped just outside the cave that night. Nobody wanted to sleep inside. Something about it felt wrong, like the air itself was heavier in there. Around midnight, I heard Carter whisper to Hines, "You think they know we're here?" Hines gave a dry laugh. "Kid, they've known since the second we crossed that bridge." I didn't join the conversation, but I felt the same. We weren't sneaking through these mountains. We were being watched. I kept scanning the ridgelines, and that's when I saw it. A flicker of light far off on the slope across from us. Just a glint, like glass catching the moon. Then it was gone. I didn't wake the others. Maybe I should have. But in that moment, I told myself it could have been nothing, a trick of the eye, except deep down I knew better. The next day, while moving out from the cave, we stumbled on another stash. Buried shallow under loose stone, Hidden, but not well enough. We dug it out. Sealed cases, metal, stamped with faded Cyrillic letters. Brenner pried one open with his knife. Inside were rifles, old models, but oiled and wrapped like they'd been waiting for someone. Alongside them were maps printed on thin paper, rolled tight. These weren't Taliban weapons. These were relics, kept alive like they still mattered. Pharaoh didn't even bother calling it in. He just ordered us to rebreathe the cases and move. If command wants answers, they'll ask, he said. His voice was tight, jaw clenched. He knew something now, the same thing we all did. We were chasing ghosts of another war. By the 5th day, we were frayed, tempers short, nerves raw. Even Brenner, usually solid, snapped at Carter for stumbling on loose rocks. That night, the air carried a new sound. Not footsteps this time, but a low hum, distant but steady. At first, we thought it was wind cutting through the valley, but the pitch never changed. It was mechanical. Generator? Hines whispered. But where? There were no villages nearby, no sign of life. Just that hum, too faint to track, but too clear to ignore. We argued about whether to follow it, but Pharaoh made the call. We stick to the route. Nobody liked it, but nobody pushed back. Orders were all we had left to hold on to. The next morning, Carter found it. He'd wandered a few yards off the trail to take a leak, and when he came back, he was holding a small leather-bound book. Dusty, corners frayed, but intact. We gathered around while Brenner flipped it open. Pages filled with cramped handwriting, diagrams, dates. Most of it wasn't in English, but some entries were. One page read, "Extraction delayed, locals relocated, remaining material classified." Another, "Test incomplete, structural risk noted," and then further in, "Do not allow discovery, site must remain sealed." We looked at each other, nobody saying a word. Finally, Hines exhaled. What the hell were they testing out here? No one had an answer, but I knew this much. The villages hadn't just left. They'd been cleared, moved, relocated like the journal said. And whatever was in that valley, someone had been willing to erase entire communities to keep it hidden. We camped on another ridge that night, but nobody slept. The hum was louder now, closer, threading through the rocks like a warning. Carter finally cracked. He tossed his helmet aside, stood up, and shouted into the dark. "If you're out there, show yourselves!" We grabbed him fast, pulled him down, hissed at him to shut up. But it was too late. His voice echoed across the valley, carried on the cold air. And then, for the first time since we'd entered Kunar, we heard an answer. Not words, just a whistle. A long, high-pitched whistle that cut through the night and froze us in place. It came from the ridge above us, then another, from the slope below, then a third behind us. We spun in every direction, rifles raised, hearts hammering. But there was nothing, just that whistle, moving around us, surrounding us, until it finally faded back into silence. By dawn, none of us were the same. We'd spent 5 days in that valley, and it felt like 5 months. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was communication. The marks on the rocks weren't random. They were messages. The abandoned villages weren't abandoned. They'd been cleared for a reason, and the deeper we pushed, the clearer it became. We weren't on a mission to secure supply routes. We were digging into something buried, something older than us, older than the war we thought we were fighting. Pharaoh wouldn't say it out loud, but even he couldn't hide it anymore. The set of his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly when he lit a cigarette. He knew this wasn't routine. None of us said it directly, but the truth was there, heavy in the air. We weren't supposed to survive this patrol. The 7th day began with frost on the ground and the sound of that hum again, closer than ever. We followed the trail forward, not because we wanted to, but because there was no turning back. What we found next made everything else, the symbols, the empty villages, the burned papers, look small in comparison. Because the valley wasn't just hiding history, it was hiding something still alive. We started moving before the sun had fully cleared the ridgeline. The frost still clung to our gear, crunching under boots, breath hanging in the air like smoke. Nobody spoke much that morning. The only sound was that hum, louder now. Not loud enough to point toward, but steady enough that every one of us felt it pressing in on us. We kept to the narrow trail, rifles slung forward, eyes cutting across every shadow. The valley was leading us, and we knew it. That's what ate at us most. We weren't choosing the path anymore. Something was pulling us along. An hour into the climb, we hit a clearing where the ground leveled out. From there, the sound grew clearer. It wasn't the whine of a generator, not exactly. It had rhythm. It pulsed, almost like a machine breathing. "Tell me you all hear that," Hines whispered. We all did. And it wasn't just noise. It was direction. We followed the sound up a narrow switchback until we reached a wall of rock. At first glance, it looked solid, but then Brenner spotted it. A seam, straight and vertical, cut into the stone. When we brushed the dirt away, it wasn't rock at all. It was metal. We stood there in silence, staring at a door taller than any of us, built flush into the mountain. Rust streaked its surface, but the edges were sharp. No markings, no locks visible, just a flat slab of steel in a place where no steel should have been. Carter's voice cracked when he spoke. "What the hell is this doing here?" Nobody had an answer. Pharaoh stepped forward, pressed his palm flat against it. "Get pictures." Now we sent them up the chain, and just like before, nothing came back. Not a word, not a single instruction. That silence was worse than the hum. We debated what to do next. Some wanted to move on, leave it behind. Others, like Brenner, argued we'd come too far to turn back. That's when we saw movement. On the ridge above, a shadow flickered between rocks, then another, lower down. We froze, rifles trained. Whoever it was, they were watching us. But they didn't fire. They didn't move closer. They just stayed there, at the edges, letting us know we were seen. Hines muttered, "They're guarding it." He was right. The villagers hadn't abandoned this place. They'd been forced out, and now whoever was left was making sure outsiders didn't touch what was buried inside. Pharaoh tried the radio again, voice tight, clipped. "Overlord, this is Hunter 1. We found a structure, requesting immediate instructions. Do you copy?" Static. He tried again. Nothing. Finally, he lowered the handset, jaw clenched. "We hold here. Nobody goes near that door until I hear otherwise." But we knew better. Command wasn't going to answer. Maybe they never planned to. Later that afternoon, Carter wandered to the stream below camp to refill canteens. He came back pale, holding something wrapped in cloth. When he unrolled it, we all leaned in. It was a notebook, water-damaged, pages warped, but still legible in places. The same handwriting we'd seen in the journal earlier. Inside were diagrams not of weapons, but of structures, tunnels, chambers, levels descending deep under the mountain. The pages labeled them with numbers, arrows, symbols. At the bottom of one sketch were 3 words in English, underlined twice. "Do not open." The kid's hands shook as he held it. "It's this place. It's that door that night. Under the stars, the squad broke apart." "We blow it," Hines said flatly. "We don't need orders for that. We put charges on the hinges and bring it down." "No," Brenner countered. "If command sent us here, it's for this. This is why we're in the valley. We're supposed to find it." "You think they want us to find it?" Hines shot back. "You think they'll pull us out after we radio in?" "Look around, Brenner. They're not answering because they don't want us leaving." The 2 men stared at each other, jaws tight, hands twitching near rifles. Pharaoh had to step in, cutting it short. "Enough. Nobody's touching it. Not yet." But the truth was clear. The door had split us. Half of us wanted to destroy it. Half of us wanted to know what was behind it. And deep down, none of us trusted command anymore. At 0200, we got our answer about whether we were alone. It started with rocks tumbling from the ridge. Then came flashes of light. Not gunfire, but signals, sweeping across the slopes like mirrors catching moonlight. Seconds later, bullets cracked through the night. We hit the dirt, returning fire blind into the darkness. Shadows darted between rocks, moving fast, firing single shots before vanishing again. They weren't trying to kill us outright. They were testing us, probing. The fight lasted maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. Time stretched in ways I can't explain. But then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No more flashes, no more shots. Just silence again. When we checked the perimeter, there were no bodies, No shell casings. Nothing. They'd vanished as if they'd never been there. And that hum, that steady rhythm, seemed louder than ever. The morning after the attack, Brenner found something shoved under a rock near camp. A folded piece of paper, worn thin, edges frayed. He opened it slowly, and we all leaned in. Written in shaky English were the words, "Do not open what you find. They will not tell you the truth. Leave this valley before it is too late." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Whoever wrote it had risked their life just to warn us. Pharaoh crushed the note in his fist. "We move." His voice was hard, final, but none of us moved with the same step anymore. Doubt had sunk in too deep. 2 kilometers north of the door, we stumbled on something else, a collapse in the ground, a sinkhole where stone had caved in. Inside, half hidden under debris, was a tunnel. Narrow, dark, lined with rusted beams. The air that drifted out was stale, metallic, wrong. Carter shined his light inside. "This connects," he said. "It has to. This is under the mountain." He was right. This wasn't just one door. This was a whole network. The cave, the maps, the hum. It all connected here. We argued again. Some wanted to go in. Others said we'd never come out. In the end, Pharaoh made the choice. 2 men, in and out, quick look. Then we moved. Brenner and I volunteered. The tunnel swallowed us quick. Our lights cut through dust that seemed to hang still in the air, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. The walls were lined with metal plates bolted into stone. Every 20 feet, there were faded markings, numbers, letters, symbols we didn't understand. The hum was stronger inside. It vibrated through our boots, crawled up our legs, settled in our chests. After 50 yards, we found it. A steel hatch, half open, hanging off its hinges. Inside was a chamber, circular, lined with consoles covered in dust. Old machines, Soviet style but still intact. And in the center, a massive cylindrical object, cables snaking out from its base, running deep into the rock. Brenner whispered, "Jesus Christ." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because on the wall above the machine, painted in red, were words in Russian. I only understood one of them. Danger. We didn't go further. We turned and got the hell out of that tunnel, lungs burning, heads pounding from the hum. When we got back to the squad, we told them what we saw. The machine, the consoles, the warning on the wall. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Hines said what we were all thinking. "That's why the villages are gone. That's why command won't answer. They don't want us to report it. They want us to bury it." We sat there in silence, the weight of it pressing down. And I realized in that moment we'd crossed a line. We weren't just soldiers on patrol anymore. We were witnesses to something we weren't supposed to see. And in war, being a witness can be more dangerous than being a fighter. By morning, we pushed north again, the valley dragging us deeper into a story none of us understood. And the next turn in that story would push us past fear into something worse, the moment when we realized even survival might not be an option. The morning after the tunnel, we woke to frost on our rifles and ash in our mouths. None of us had lit a fire, but the air smelled burned, as if something smoldered deep under the mountain. We packed quickly, moving with that heavy silence that comes when everyone's thinking the same thing, but no one dares say it. The valley narrowed again, cliffs pinching tight, trail cutting through loose shale. That hum we'd heard for days, it was stronger now, pressing against our eardrums. Not loud, but constant, like a pressure you can't shake. Nobody spoke until Carter tripped on the rocks and went down hard. When Brenner reached to pull him up, Carter snapped. He shoved Brenner back, eyes wild. "They knew," he shouted. "Command knew about this place before we ever stepped foot in it. We're not here to fight Taliban. We're here to disappear." Pharaoh grabbed him by the vest, hissed through clenched teeth, "Get your head right, Marine." But even Pharaoh's hands shook as he said it. That was the moment I knew the squad wasn't just tired. We were breaking. By noon, we hit a stretch where the valley widened into a bowl of stone. No cover, no trees, just flat ground with ridges circling us. The kind of place you'd never step into if you had a choice. We didn't have a choice. Halfway across, the first shot cracked. The round slammed into the dirt between my boots. "Contact ridge!" Brenner shouted. We dropped, returning fire toward the high ground. Shadows moved along the rim, firing down, disappearing, reappearing in new positions. They were coordinated, disciplined, not random fighters. Rounds chewed the dirt, ricocheted off rocks. Carter was screaming, firing bursts too high. Brenner crawled to him, smacked his helmet. "Control it!" We tried to push for cover, but there was none. Just open ground. That's when the mortars came. The first shell landed 50 yards out, blasting stone into the air. The second hit closer, heat washing across us, ears ringing. Pharaoh grabbed the radio, yelling into static. "Overlord, this is Hunter 1. We are under heavy fire, requesting immediate support." Nothing. Just the hum of the valley and the crack of incoming rounds. We were on our own. Pinned in the open, we made the only move we could. Forward, toward a cut in the ridge where the trail continued. "Smoke out!" Hines shouted, popping grenades that spewed white clouds. We sprinted, bent low, rounds tearing through the haze. My lungs burned, legs heavy, heart slamming against my ribs. A round caught Carter in the shoulder. He spun, dropped hard. I grabbed his vest, dragging him through the dust. Brenner covered us, rifle snapping, shouting curses at the ridge. We made it to the cut, piled against stone, sucking air. Carter was pale, blood soaking his sleeve, but still alive. We were alive too, barely. When the firing stopped, we waited in that narrow cut, weapons ready. The ridges above were silent again, like nothing had happened. That silence was worse than the fight. It meant they'd let us go. Carter's wound wasn't fatal, but he needed a medic. We didn't have one. We wrapped the shoulder as best we could, gave him morphine, told him to hold on. He nodded, but his eyes were glassy. Pharaoh crouched against the rock, head low. For the first time, he looked older than he was. "They're not trying to kill us," he said. "They're hurting us." Nobody argued. 2 hours later, limping along the trail, we found another entrance. This one wasn't collapsed. It was open, black mouth gaping in the cliffside. Above it, carved into the stone, were those same sharp slashes we'd seen before. The hum was stronger here, pulsing from inside. We stopped. Nobody wanted to go in, but the trail left us no other path. Either climb the cliff under sniper eyes or step into the dark. Pharaoh looked at us one by one, then gave the order. "Inside, move." The tunnel swallowed us quick. Our lights cut through damp air, beams bouncing off rusted supports. The ground was packed dirt, scarred with old tire tracks. 50 yards in, the tunnel widened into a chamber, and that's where we saw it. A row of machines lined the walls. Metal, rusted but intact. Consoles with dials, switches, labels in Russian. Wires snaked across the floor, some cut, others still running deeper into the mountain. And in the center, a platform. On it, a cylindrical object taller than a man, bolted down, cables feeding into its base. It hummed. The sound wasn't just noise anymore. It vibrated through bone, set teeth on edge, made my chest tighten. "What the hell is it?" Carter whispered, clutching his arm. None of us answered, because none of us knew. On the far wall, painted in faded red, were words. Russian again, but one stood out in English, scrawled beneath in crude letters, "Do not awaken." Brenner swore under his breath. "This isn't weapons storage. This is something else." Pharaoh moved closer to the machine, light sweeping across its surface. "Photograph it." Every angle we did, sent them up. And again, silence. That silence confirmed everything. Command knew. Command didn't want us out. While we were inside, the mountain shook. At first just a tremor, then a deep rumble that sent dust raining from the ceiling. Rocks cracked loose, smashing to the floor. "Out!" Brenner shouted. We scrambled, dragging Carter, stumbling toward the tunnel mouth. Behind us, part of the chamber caved, crushing machines, snapping cables. Sparks flew, smoke filled the air. We burst out into daylight, gasping, covered in dust. The tunnel collapsed behind us in a thunder of stone. The hum didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder. That night, camped near the cliff, we heard it. The whistle. Same as before, long and high, cutting through the dark. But this time it wasn't distant. It was close, all around us. Shadows flickered between trees. Figures moved on the ridge. We raised rifles, fingers tight on triggers. One figure stepped closer, just enough for moonlight to catch his face. Weathered, eyes hollow, beard streaked with gray. He raised his hand, not in surrender, but in warning. Then he was gone, swallowed back into the dark. We didn't sleep at all. By dawn, it was clear. We weren't just lost in enemy territory. We weren't on patrol anymore. We were trapped in a game we didn't understand. The villagers had been cleared. The symbols weren't random. The machines weren't abandoned. Somebody had buried something in this valley decades ago, and somebody else was making damn sure it stayed buried. But now we'd seen it. We'd touched it. And once you've seen something like that, you don't walk away clean. That day we pushed deeper still, not because we wanted to, but because there was nowhere else to go. The valley had us now, and what waited further ahead would tear away the last layer of denial, forcing us to face the fact that survival wasn't promised. And even if we did live, we might not be allowed to return. Because in Kunar in 2008, we weren't fighting a war. We were witnesses to one that had already been fought, buried, and kept secret, and the people who buried it weren't finished yet. We left the collapsed tunnel behind us and kept moving north. The path narrowed into broken stone, every step sending gravel sliding into the valley below. Nobody said a word. Carter's breathing was shallow, each exhale tight with pain. Brenner carried most of his gear now, but the kid was still slipping, staggering. The hum followed us, even after the tunnel sealed shut. Louder now, deeper, as if it was under the ground itself. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was inside us, running through bone, pressing on nerves until our teeth ached. By midday, we reached another plateau. From there, we could see the valley stretching wide, mountains jagged against the horizon. But there was no sense of freedom in that view. If anything, it felt worse, like standing in the middle of a giant bowl, with eyes watching from every rim. That's when we saw them, figures on the far slope, 10, maybe 12, standing still, rifles slung, just watching, not moving, not firing, just letting us know we weren't alone. "They're hurting us," Hines muttered. He was right. Every turn, every ridge, we were being guided deeper. And now, with the tunnel collapsed behind us, there was no way back. Toward evening, we stumbled on an outpost, half buried in the slope, sandbags rotting, metal roof rusted through. Soviet design, no doubt. We cleared it slow, rifles up, expecting contact. But it was empty. Dust thick in the air, rat droppings on the floor. In the corner, an old cot with springs poking through, beside a rusted stove. Brenner found a locker wedged shut. He pried it open, and inside were folders. Paper yellowed, pages stuck together, but still legible. We sat in a circle, thumbing through them. The text was mostly Russian, but some English reports were tucked in. Phrases jumped out. Containment breach, 1987. Civilian relocation complete. Further testing suspended by directive. Remain classified. No recovery teams authorized. We read in silence, each line heavier than the last. Whatever they had been doing in this valley, it hadn't been abandoned. It had been sealed and left to rot in the mountains. And now we were the ones inside it. That night, under the rusted roof of the outpost, Pharaoh tried the radio again. For the first time in days, a voice crackled back. Hunter 1, confirmed status. Pharaoh's eyes lit with something between relief and anger. He gripped the handset. We are combat ineffective. Multiple wounded. We've encountered structures, machines, Soviet origin. Request immediate exfil silence. Then the voice came back, flat, mechanical. Hunter 1, remain on mission, continue north. Further instructions will follow. Pharaoh slammed the radio down hard enough to crack plastic. Remain on mission, he spat. They don't give a damn if we live or die. No one argued, we all knew it. The silence wasn't an accident. Command had been listening the whole time. They'd let us walk into it. By dawn, Carter couldn't go on. His wound was infected, fever burning through him. He tried to hide it, biting down on his lip, forcing himself forward, but his body betrayed him. We stopped near a cluster of rocks, laid him down. He looked up at us, face pale, eyes too bright. Don't let them drag me deeper, he whispered. We tried to reassure him, told him we'd get him out. but he shook his head. You don't get it. None of us are getting out. He pressed something into my hand, the notebook he'd found at the stream. If one of you makes it, you tell someone. Anyone. Don't let them bury it again. Before I could answer, he slumped. Breath shallow, chest barely rising. We gave him morphine. Too much, if I'm honest. Enough that he didn't feel the end. We buried him under stone, quick and quiet. No markers, no words. Just the valley keeping another body. That grave was the moment it became real. We weren't a squad anymore. We were survivors moving on borrowed time. A day later, Brenner's radio crackled again. Not command this time. A faint signal, broken, half static. Leave. Valley. Sealed. Repeat. Sealed. Then it cut out. We stared at the radio like it was a ghost. Who was it? Another unit? Locals? Someone who knew what we'd stumbled into? Pharaoh tried to trace it, adjusting the dial, but the signal never returned. Just static. But the message was clear enough. We weren't supposed to be there, and the valley wasn't supposed to be opened. Ninth day came with hunger, thirst, and failing gear-soaked boots, battered bodies, nothing left in reserve. We followed the trail deeper, because there was nothing else to do. Every night the whistles came. Every night figures flickered on ridges, always close, never striking, watching. The hum grew unbearable. It vibrated in our skulls, kept us from sleeping, made tempers flare at nothing. Hines snapped at Brenner over a can of rations, and they nearly came to blows before I pulled them apart. We were unraveling. That's when we found the last site. The trail ended at a pit cut into the mountain, wide and circular, lined with concrete. A rusted crane towered over it, cables hanging limp. At the bottom, half buried in rock and dust, was another machine, larger than the one in the tunnel. Cables still connected, running into the ground. Panels open, wires torn out. The hum was deafening here, pressing against our skulls until our vision blurred. On the wall beside the pit, spray-painted in English, were 3 words: "Not for us." We stood there in silence, rifles slack at our sides, staring at something we couldn't understand but couldn't deny. Pharaoh finally lowered his weapon, voice barely a whisper. This is what they sent us for. Not to fight, not to patrol, to confirm it's still here. And in that moment, I knew he was right. We didn't get time to think. The first shot cracked from the ridge, then another. Figures poured from the slopes, moving fast, firing disciplined bursts. Not Taliban, not random fighters. These were soldiers, trained, equipped. We fired back, stone chips blasting into the air, echoes deafening in the pit. Rounds tore through packs, slammed against helmets. Brenner went down hard, blood spraying across the dirt. Hines dragged him behind cover, shouting, but Brenner's eyes were already glassy. Pharaoh barked orders, voice hoarse, but we were scattered, pinned from all sides. I fired until my rifle clicked dry, hands shaking as I slammed in another mag. The fight didn't last long, maybe 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it was over, the ridge was empty again. No bodies, no shell casings, just the smell of blood and powder, and the pit humming louder than ever. Brenner was dead. So were 2 more. That left me, Hines, and Pharaoh. 3 men in a valley that had swallowed whole squads before us. We sat in the dirt, blood on our hands, rifles across our knees. None of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. The hum filled the silence, steady, endless. I realized then that it would outlast us all. Pharaoh finally stood, radio in hand. He keyed it one last time. Overlord, this is Hunter 1, mission complete. Do you copy? Static. Then faint and cold, Hunter 1, acknowledge. Proceed north. Extraction not authorized. Pharaoh stared at the handset like it had betrayed him. Then he threw it into the pit. That was it. Command wasn't going to save us. They'd sent us here to vanish. We decided to turn south, not because we thought we'd make it, but because going deeper wasn't survival. It was suicide. With torn boots and blood-stiff clothes, we staggered on, the valley stripped of sound, ridges empty and watching, as if it had gotten what it wanted. We walked for 2 days, Hines collapsed on the second, legs giving out, fever burning through him. He begged us to leave him, and eventually we did. I can still hear his voice fading behind me, calling out until it turned to whispers, then nothing. By the time I staggered out of that valley, I was alone. When I reached base, I was half dead, sunburned, bleeding, starving. They rushed me into medical, hooked me up to IVs, stitched wounds I barely remembered getting. When I woke, 2 men in suits were standing at the foot of my bed. Not officers, not anyone I'd seen before. They asked questions, flat and rehearsed. What had I seen? Who was left alive? What did I remember? When I told them about the tunnels, the machines, the notebooks, they just nodded. They didn't write anything down. The next day, I was debriefed again. Different men, same questions. After that, I was told not to speak of it. Official records said ambush, heavy losses, mission incomplete. No mention of tunnels, no mention of machines. The valley was erased on paper, the way the villages had been erased in reality. That's how it ended for the squad. Not with medals, not with recognition, just silence. And that silence has lasted longer than the war itself. It's been years since Kunar Valley, but I can still hear the hum. Not in my ears anymore, but in memory, deep in my chest like a bruise that never healed. They told me to move on. Told me it was just another patrol gone wrong, another fight in a war full of them. Official reports say the squad was lost to ambushes, terrain, bad luck, nothing more. No mention of doors in the mountain. No mention of machines that still breathed after decades. No mention of the people who tried to keep us away. But I know what I saw. I know what we walked into. The men in suits who questioned me never wrote anything down. They never told me what I was supposed to believe. They just listened, nodded, and reminded me that some things were not for public knowledge. Then they left, and I never saw them again. After that, my transfer orders came fast. Different unit, different province. No more talk of Kunar. My mouth stayed shut because I knew what happened to guys who didn't keep quiet. Some disappeared into paperwork. Others drank themselves out of the Corps. I chose silence. But silence doesn't erase memory. Sometimes I dream not of firefights, but of empty villages, meals half finished, blankets still warm as if lives had only just stepped away. The kind of silence that isn't natural. I wonder about those families, where they went, what they were told, if they knew what had been sealed under their land, or if they were just forced out without explanation. And I wonder about the men who attacked us, the ones who never finished the fight. Were they protecting the valley from us? Or were they protecting us from what lay beneath it? I'll never know. None of us will. But sometimes I think they weren't our enemy at all. 2008 feels like a lifetime ago, but the valley hasn't gone away. Not for me, not for the men who never made it out. And I know for a fact it hasn't gone away for the people who run the wars behind the wars. Every now and then, I hear whispers, a declassified line buried in a report, a rumor passed in a bar by someone who served in the same region. Always vague, always unfinished, but enough to remind me that Kunar was never just a valley. Somebody still keeps it quiet. Somebody still makes sure it never shows up in history books. And that tells me one thing. Whatever we found in those tunnels, it still matters. I tell this story not for closure because there is none, but because silence is the last weapon they use. If nobody speaks, then Kunar becomes just another line in an endless war. Just another place where Marines fought, bled, and died for reasons no one will ever ask about. But the truth is simpler and darker. We weren't fighting the Taliban in that valley. We weren't fighting for hearts and minds. We weren't even fighting for our own survival. We were witnesses, and witnesses are dangerous. So when I'm asked what happened in 2008 when Marines entered Kunar Valley, I don't give the clean version. I don't talk about strategy or politics or mission objectives. I talk about silence. I talk about villages emptied overnight, about doors in mountains that should never exist, about machines still alive decades after they were buried. And I talk about the cost of knowing and the cost of never being allowed to tell. That's the truth I carry, the truth I'll carry until my last breath, because some things stay buried, but not forever. You're still watching without subscribing? Make sure you don't miss the next story. Subscribe now and share with your friends. Tell us your country, the time you're watching, and any real-life incident like this, then post it in the comments.